Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Kevin Williams, the publisher at Talonbooks, and I'm very pleased to welcome you all, ladies, gentlemen, friends, scholars, poets, readers, to the launch of Scree, the collected earlier poems of Fred Waugh. I'm not going to be your MC tonight, but I'll just make a couple of quick points. The first one being that Scree is the sort of second volume that we're doing in a series of collecteds, and the first one was Peacock Blue, the collected poems of Phyllis Webb. And so Scree follows on it, and though Fred doesn't like to think so, I think it's a very worthy successor to Peacock Blue. We do have a couple of copies hidden under the table back there of Peacock Blue if you want to see how the two of them match up and fit together. And I also want to, well, actually it occurred to me earlier today that I actually started working on this book with Carl Ziegler back in 2008. A couple of Fred's books went out of print, and we started talking about what we should do about bringing the content back. And here we are, 2015. This is how it came back, and I'm really happy that it turned out this way. I have to acknowledge a couple of other people in the room. Greg Gibson is over there, and he was the managing editor and one of the editors on the books. 2 years or 2.5 years of hard labor. And sitting beside him, another hardworking Talonite, Les Smith, who does most of our book design, but really worked hard on this particular book. And I thank him very much for delivering a really lovely book that I will be proud to the moment I go to my grave to have published. So thank you, Les. And as always, I thank all the Talon staff, Anne-Marie, Chloe, my wife Vicki, my son Spencer, and the recently joined Shazia for all their help running the press. We are just about to publish in a week or two our 28th book, and that'll be the last book of 2015. So I'm glad that we've been able to keep the press running, hopefully to Carl's standards. Impossible. Well, he hasn't sent me too many terse notes, or not so terse as the case may be. So tonight, the book is actually edited. The introduction is by Jeff Derksen, our friend and colleague and scholar, professor up at Simon Fraser, the author of numerous books, winner of a lot of awards, and participant in many cultural activities worldwide. I always think of him in Vienna, Austria, but I know he was just in New York this summer for months and all that stuff. So I'm going to get Jeff to guide us through the night and introduce all the readers. So basically, it's one of those nights when everybody will be reading Fred Waugh. So it's Fred Waugh and friends reading Fred Waugh. Without further ado, Jeff Derksen.
Thanks, Kevin, and thanks everyone for coming out for this, for the launch of this great book from Fred's early work. First, to begin, of course, I want to acknowledge that we're on the unceded indigenous land belonging to the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, the Stolo, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations, which feels particularly important for a book that deals so politically with place, which I think is one of the great impulses within Scree. So just to give you a sense of how the evening is going to unfold, I'll make a few introductory remarks about Scree and how we edited it and designed it, working with Les and other folks there at Talon. And then we'll have brief readings of poems that have been selected from Scree by Colin Brown, and in this order, Colin Brown, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Deanna Fong, Larissa Lai, Daphne Marlett, Roy Meeky, Stan Persky, Carl Ziegler, and Rita Wong, which is like the great all-star lineup. We'll have a brief intermission, time to grab a drink and a book, and then we'll come back, and there's a short clip of Fred reading from Tree in a reading that he did here at the Western Front in 1974. Then Fred will read some work to round out the evening, and for that shorter part, second half. So I was thinking of this as a launch of a major new book of major old work from Fred Waugh. As you know, or for that term from Fred uses a lot in his work, and a word that's used a lot in this poem, in the book, is scree, which is a geological term for the loose rocks that form a fan down the side of a mountain. and they've broken off over time from freezing and thawing. So as a metaphor for Fred's work, you think of Scree as a process within the landscape, and that's also how we came to think and talk about the poetry as well. And that was actually something that Susan Rudy talked about in an essay that was quite central for me in the introduction. It's also the name of a magazine that Fred edited from South Slocan after he and Pauline returned to Canada from their studies at SUNY Buffalo. However, the great title Scree was not the first suggestion for the title of this book. Fred first put forward the title of Bzz Blah Tr Kick, which you might recognize as a visual poem from the pictograms of the interior of BC. But we suggested that a title that was unpronounceable, as I just demonstrated, and which would always be auto-corrected whenever it was entered into a search field, might not be the best way to go for his first collected works book. As a way of taking poetry outside of market concerns, yes, good move, but as a title, otherwise not so great. So I've been reading Fred's work since I first encountered it when I mistakenly took out pictograms from the interior of BC for an essay on pictographs and petroglyphs for a second-year anthropology course at Douglas College when it was still in the temporary trailers in New Westminster, across from the Shell gas station at 8th and McBride where I worked. Fred's poetry book didn't ultimately help me with the essay. I think I got an A- on it, quite proud to this day still of that. But after taking my critical evaluation, mustering all my critical tools at that time to think that, what's this shit? It did set me out to read all of Fred's work, which was in those trailers there. So after studying with Fred and Pauline at David Thompson University Center in Nelson, and then later in Calgary, I was knowing them so well and knowing the work so well, I was curious to read this earlier work as a whole, to read it together and read it in its totality in a sense, and then to think through editorial processes. But even on the first readings of it gathered together, of this familiar work, under one roof, so to speak, it became clear that the project that emerged was much more than the gathering of the texts and the individual books under one cover. And just a quick note on the cover too, that it's a screen print from 1967 from Tak Tanabe that I first saw at a show at the SFU Galleries up on the hill that Melanie O'Brien curated earlier this year. So the print is contemporaneous with the book. But in terms of editing, we set out to put Scree together as a book itself, following Fred's own poetics of the book as a unit of composition. So as I say in the introduction, Scree is a book of books, but it's also a book in its own with attention to the movement from poem to poem and from book to book within it. From this initial editorial decision, 2 editing tactics came forward. Well, actually 3 at the beginning. The first was to drop some of the earlier poems that were published in TISH. So Scree is technically a selected collected. We selected the poems from TISH if they dealt with the themes that reoccur or are reworked within the book. So there's almost no poems about the whirling gulls, the whirling seagulls, and few poems about soft thighs within this collection, if you're familiar with some of those earlier works from TISH. The second editorial decision was to order the poems outside of the chronology of their publication date in order to create a different movement from book to book within Scree. So when you look at Scree, you'll see that so far from 1991 comes before 1981's Breathing My Name with a Sigh. Part of this was to order the poems closer to the date of composition rather than the date of publication. And this, I think, gives a greater sense of the structure of feelings, of the social moment that the poems were written in, and gives a greater political texture to Scree itself. And thirdly, we decided to reproduce 2 books, Tree and Earth, from Fred's one-word title period, as facsimiles within Scree. This was to capture that materialist aspect and aesthetics of small press publication of the 1970s, much less ship and receive as today, and more ink on fingers. And I see this type of reproduction, or where I first saw this being used very effectively was in a magazine called The Happy Hypocrite that was edited by Maria Fusco, and they'd been publishing workers' pamphlets from the 30s and other things, other facsimiles like that. And sometimes the issue of the magazine would simply be an entire other book published in this facsimile. And I wanted to bring this forward materially into Scree. What also came out of these readings of these works as a whole was a set of continuities and coalitions. I'm picking up on the way that Larissa Lai has recently used the concept of coalitions in relationship to Canadian Asian writing. So as I write in the introduction, the coalitions that inform this work and which the poetry draws a certain kind of dialogue from are the communities and poetics and literary movements that WA has been associated with and instrumental to. The continuities are the concerns, themes, and poetics that are reworked throughout this book. These give Scree multiple narratives of place and movement, clusters and images, philosophical and linguistic propositions that at times intersect or crystallize through poetic turns and at other times run parallel, adding to the texture of the book, even when the coherence or closure is strategically avoided. Wa's poetry is remarkably coherent, even as the poems themselves never tie up neatly. And that was really the great thing of reading these as a whole, was to see how the diversity of the poetic tactics actually added up to a multiplicity within the book, but then continually reworked these themes as different social textures, let's say, changed around them. I found that very actually powerfully moving within the book. Lastly, I do think that Scree is an innovative book in itself, and the work, which ranges from 62 to 91 and is drawn from 13 books, is not only important today, but it opens up a new mattering map or new routes into thinking about trajectories of poetry in North America since the 1960s. I think the book complicates some of the positions regarding race in the avant-garde in North America, as well as the relationships between and the disciplinarity of Asian North American writing, Asian American writing, and Asian Canadian writing. So as Fred wrote in 1995, the writers I'm interested in have always written from an aesthetic and political position of departure, displacement, decolonization, deterritorialization, and so forth. This other space continually generated methods of resistance and intervention. So Scree is also a book that shows us how poetics and the relationship of aesthetics and politics agitate or scuff up a biopolitics, what Foucault calls the art of being governed like that. And by governed, I don't just mean the relationship that we have or bodies have or subjects have with the state, but rather governed as a marker of the limitations of forms of resistance and intervention, and ultimately communities and coalitions, which I think runs so strongly through this book. So it was a great delight to work with Fred on this, and great delight to, of course, have extended conversations with Fred and Pauline on Union Street. A great named street. I wish there was more Union Streets. So I'm going to read quickly one. This is the guilty poem that I wanted to read from the text, and then just decided to right now. Don't cut me down. I don't want any of this tree poetry shit from you. You don't know what a fucking tree is. If you think it's only in your head, you're full of shit. Trees is trees, and the only thing they're good for is lumber, so don't give me any of that crap about them being something else. For Christ's sake, you think the rest of us don't know sweet fuck all compared to you. Well, you don't know nothing till you go out there and bust your back on them. Set in chokers, break your ass so fast you wouldn't want to look at a goddamn tree, let alone write about them. Then you'd know what a tree was, instead of yapping about it. So let's move to our star-studded readings from people here. And the first one, we're doing it alphabetically, so it's Colin Brown, a great colleague from up in Nelson, where I first met Colin, the David Thompson University Center. He's a filmmaker, a curator, art and myth researcher, a teacher. His fourth collection of poetry from Talonbooks, The Hatch, was published earlier this year, and a colleague from David Thompson University Center and the Kootenai School of Writer. He's a provocateur and rides the same bike as Fred, a Brody. Colin, thanks.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm going to read from this little book called Grasp a Sparrow's Tail. 1982 is the year that Fred and Pauline invited me to stay in their house while they went to Asia. And this is a little travel journal that Fred had published in Japan. And on August the 5th, so in this text, as well as some wonderfully dense consonants, he's got on one side his journal entries, and on the other side poems that somehow perhaps react to those. And on August the 5th, he writes, "We tour Hong Kong today. I take notes, re-places I've seen my father since he died. I think of him here 60 years ago. See first statues and full of color, white is death, red for marriage. Numbers 2, 9 for longevity and active life, 8 for wealth." I think Fred and I were both father-haunted in those years. Numbers, he had also discovered that in Japanese the verb came at the end. Numbers and everything said. Clatter each block, commerce tooled, fronted with doing, some piece or all of it. Lucre, personal contrivance shuttle. Family woven decades ahead, first his father and even him, and his son. Place, attribute, magnetic magic, like that tailored jade street. Single attempt to move made so that generation gets skyline to 1997 after direct incant from latitude Cantonese genocide. Nil hope stalled, not to edit out immigrant identity. Cancel head count not really meaningful. Money exchange added up with calculation mind. Mind counts the years. Abacus clicks in the market stall. Can't wait for seasonal switch. Typhoon number late. Afternoon, maybe a winter somewhere in his mind, but far away. Far away. Thanks. And thank you, Fred.
Thanks, Colin. And next is Ryan Fitzpatrick, who's a doctoral candidate at SFU, a bibliographer at the Fred Waugh Digital Archive at SFU, a poet of numerous chapbooks, including, I have to say, the really excellent dealingwithit.gif with its beautiful cover, and from Talonbooks last year, Fortified Castles. He's also he worked as an editor also at Filling Station and was central to that great Calgary scene of the past decades. So, Ryan?
So I would have, I should say thanks, Jeff, first. So I would have met Fred when I took a creative writing class with him in Calgary at the university in 2000, 2001, I think. He gave me an A-. But I would have met Fred's work the year before because I took a creative writing class with Nicole Markotic. And for Christmas, she gave us homework, and she gave us each 3 books to read, each of us different books. And she gave me a book by Sharon Thiessen. It's not that I don't remember which one. It's just she said, just go read a book by Sharon Thiessen. How to Write by Gertrude Stein, which was an exciting book to get when you were learning how to write. That was a joke about the title. And Owner's Manual by Fred. So I thought, because that would have been the first book I would have read of Fred, I would read something from that. How to read a map. Side to start from side, city, get a vehicle/animal, check out the growth, look at the people, put your arms around one of them, any one of them, stretch yourself. It's like old friends, a story sometimes, you tell yourself, then something else happens. Now where are you? An intense map of routes, places to find again or discover, i.e. imagine, through all that, but not there yet. The death, i.e. you noticed it, waits down the road. It's a story, everybody running, over someplace over the hill, what they think is a hill. Don't pay attention to the terrain, signs become questions, maybe not a city. Look at them, they're not birds. The signs are not other creatures. Try this, the signs are projectile, have weight just like an arrow, with feathers at one end. And you know what at the other? All around things. The night sky filled with them. We still think they're stars, but they get in the way of the vision, the trace of thought, the line grows across the plan, not a city, but a forest with a big boulder in the middle of it. The middle of the forest, their proportion gets it together. In a dance, leaves us in a heat. And the complicated tracks remain how to get ga-ha! Headless moons, from here to there, incredibly difficult shapes, even languages, places, the place, the land jive, land, on the other side of the water, the soft, the hard, the softest hard, and more story. More directions, here to there, line from mind gets nowhere, past dying, journeying, and the returns, he called it, cute, boomerang, i.e. the truth. Path flows through a crowded cornfield near Albuquerque, near Toronto, near Heraklion. South of here, there are ripe tomatoes. Nothing solved, the side is. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. And next up is Deanna Fong, who's an audio specialist and archivist who moved to Vancouver from Montreal, and she's a PhD candidate at SFU as well, where she's working on the Roy Kayuka audio, and also she's the central force, I think, behind Fred Waugh's digital archives online and also at the special collections at SFU, and is also the editor for audio assemblage at the Capilano Review. Deanna.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks so much to Fred for asking me to read. I'm going to be reading also from Grasp the Sparrow's Tale, which I read on a recent trip to Hong Kong, almost 33 years exactly to the day of when it was written. And it resonated really deeply with me, not only because of the sort of parallel circumstances, but also because of its articulations of foreignness and a particular type of mixed race experience. So this is an untitled piece from Grasp the Sparrow's Tale. So what have I got going besides this father list? I watched a painter leaned over the table doing calligraphy last night, watched him, watched his body, looked for his chi rising to the surface, quick, flashy, very intentional moves, so the flurry of the brush was true. I like the actualization of intent, which was not an intent, an inclination, really, a bent or a tropos, which was paid attention to. Me. I've misplaced the family information my mother gave me, so I can't check out actual possible connections still here in the Canton region. I mentioned this to the guides and the others in our tour group, tell them my father was sent here as a child to be raised and educated by his Chinese relatives. You were part Chinese, I tell them. They look at me. I'm pulling their leg. So I'm Chinese too, and that's why my name is Hua. They don't really believe me. That's okay. When you're not pure, you just make it up. Thanks.
Thanks, Deanna. And next, Larissa Lai, who recently moved from Vancouver to Calgary, where she's a Canadian Research Chair in Creative Writing at the University of Calgary, and where she also directs the Insurgent Architects House for Creative Writing. She's published numerous books of fiction and poetry, and her recent critical book, Slanting Eye, Imagining We, Asian Canadian Literary Production in the 1980s and 1990s, I think is a crucial text. Thanks, Larissa.
So I've been feeling torn all day as to which poem to read because this is it's such an extraordinary collection. I'm still torn right this very minute. I know Fred largely through our travels through the 90s. Many of them with Roy Miki as well. In Asia, I'm remembering a really wonderful trip that we all did in Taiwan together, visiting a bunch of different cities and many different universities and speaking to students. And tonight also, Jeff was talking earlier about community and the way in which Fred thinks about community and thinks about the work of coalition. So maybe I will read from E-Light. The one that's sort of falling by the wayside is the one that follows what you read just now, which is from Tree, and it's about the rings of the tree and thinking about it as the convolutions of the brain, also very beautiful. I think I'm going to read from E-Light, though. So this is E-Light 9. When you returned from China via Victoria on Hong Kong Island, and they put you in jail in Victoria on Vancouver Island because your birth certificate had been lost in the Medicine Hat City Hall fire, and your parents couldn't prove you were born in Canada until they found your baptism records in the church, or in the spring of 1948, when we moved to Nelson from Trail during the floods while Mao chased Chiang Kai-shek from the mainland to offshore Taiwan, and the Generalissimo's picture hung in our house and on a wall above some plants and goldfish in the Chinese Nationalist League house down the street. The Chinese Nationalist League house down on Lake Street, or when you arrived in China in 1916, only 4 years old, unable to speak Chinese, and later in the Roaring Twenties, when each time Grandpa gambled away your boat passage so that you didn't get back to Canada until 1930, languageless again with anger, locked up in the immigration cells on the Juan de Fuca Strait. Or when your heart crashed so young at 54 as you fell from Mom's arms to the dance floor. Did you see the islands?
Thanks, Larissa. I also think that's a key text within the book too, and one that leads to Diamond Grill in a sense. A little syntactically different, but yeah. And now Daphne Marlett will read. She's, of course, a novelist, an editor, a translator, a playwright, a teacher, a mentor, a critic, an urban documentarist, and a companion poet of Fred's since the early 1960s. Her most recent book, Being Liquidities, is a retooling of the fantastic earlier Vancouver poems, and Daphne's work is slated to be the next book in this Fantastic Talents Collected series. Daphne.
Thanks, Jeff. And thanks, Fred, for such a beautiful life's work so far, till 91. It's wonderful to see this book in its physical form duplicating the terrific quality of the writing. And I, too, like Larissa, was torn all day about what to read. I came down from 4 pieces to 2 pieces, but I think I'll only read one since that's what we seem to be doing. And this is from one of my favorite books of Fred's, Breathing My Name with a Sigh. That's 1981, and the first time, I remember seeing Fred in the hallways of the Buchanan building and not really engaging with him, but I do remember towards the end of that TISH time, 1963, I think when I first really felt a connection with both Fred and Pauline was at the incredible party they threw at the end of the 1963 summer school, now called conference, where there were a lot of people in various stages of inebriation and other kinds of other minds. And I've always associated that party with the fire hall, because I think you lived above the fire hall or next to the police station. And I've always felt there was a connection between that party and Robert Creeley living above a fire station. There's something about, I'll still think of it as a fire hall. There's something about that, the energy of a blazing fire, that is very definitely present in the syntax, in Fred Waugh's syntax. It moves rapidly. And yet, when I was reading through the whole manuscript, I was struck by the persistence of his attempts to get at the actual sensory and philosophical feel of being, of what it's like to be in a landscape, to be in a body. And so I'll read this one because it's about a river, and Fred and I both love rivers. And it uses a word for soul. It's an old word, Germanic. I don't know if I can pronounce it correctly, but it comes from a dictionary that he loves and that he and Pauline gave to me in 1980, the Heritage Dictionary that has wonderful etymologies in it. And this is the Germanic word for soul. The sounds of a river, ree, 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 and part of the color of that water in the night, blue and slate vision over river in the sky, runs through all the stars last night, morning, out over the lake, light, picture two, into dawn, horizon, mountains. Never wonder much which one is that, or that star in mind's eye, but this looking at them, this ride on out. Cups in the rocks along the shore, rock water gatherers, sandpipers skirt their beach, and a lot of words like soul, air, breath, sowala, day, work, eons, message, death map, counting it forever, head underwater, water sounds, gurgle over creek stones, granite. Or eyes in sky sound the same, birds' chirps fill up the world left over from the night, heads full and black till daybreak breaks, beaks get through bumps in the night sky, to daytime close to sounds and colors effervescent.
Thanks, Daphne. I know that dictionary. I think Fred and Pauline made us buy it for courses that we took up in Nelson. And one way too, this series of collected poems that Talon's doing, which is also continuing a legacy of that long-term stable relationship that Talon has created with writers. I think this is an extension of those selected poems that were from the 1980s. And one of my favorite pieces of Fred's critical writing is the introduction to Daphne's selected works. I think is a beautiful essay. Our next reader is Roy Meekie, of course, a cultural icon, political invigorator across Canada, provocateur, literary scholar, collagist, editor, teacher, co-author of children's books, Japanese-Canadian redress activist, and also a poet who, of course, has come out with his 5th book of poetry, Mannequin Rising, from New Star Books. Roy Meekie.
Wow, it's great to be here this evening to celebrate Fred's book. Fred, it's a wonderful book, and it's been a great pleasure of mine to be amongst your friends over the past, I don't know how many decades. And I always think, when I think of Fred's poetry, I think he's one of the only people I know who thinks and breathes poetry and poetics 24/7. And anytime I've got some problem about life or something like that, I can always check it out with Fred and see what his take on it is. He's always got advice for me as well. So we've been through a lot of things together, and I've always felt very grateful that he's on our side. Because I would not want to be opposed to him in any way. His friendship has been very valuable to me, and he's gotten me into a lot of dark corners and helped me get out of them, thank God. But we've retained our friendship, and this book is something else. It's heavy and big, and it's a real tribute to his accomplishments in this vast country of ours. Owner's Manual, I want to read one piece. Ryan read a piece from it. I'm going to just read a very short piece, and then I'm going to read a few pieces from so far. How to take a leak in the snow on a January night up the valley. There's that boat again, through winter trees. Look at it. Look at it. Oh, a perfect half moon, perfectly drunk. I think is homage to Li Po. This is from a lovely sequence from So Far, that brought me back to my own childhood in Winnipeg, growing up in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And it's a sequence called first pickerel, second pickerel, third pickerel, so on. 6 pieces. I'm just going to read the first 3. And I chose these because they're especially challenging. If any of you know the Fred Walian syntax, it's a difficult line to follow. And I thought, what the hell, I'm going to try this one out. First pickerel. Double bone and all around the fish images of northern lakes, all of them, or each one freezing over with latitude. And the double bone comes out of the mouth with a warning to the tongue and throat. Then, what about the fish scale skin and human face frozen thereafter or before, in such a fish thinking ahead of the fisherman, the catch and the slip of the tongue to make the hook hold curious places in taste here, such ice water imaging cast up into the mouth, I mean from the driftwood and all that gray and white breeding. Second pickerel. Imagine the bird as a fish swimming, those ducks, streaks, eating weeds, stuffed, skin crisp, bone dry, also sing about going straight ahead to China, carp, or ling cod on the walls of the water, and being there is all it takes for the sky to feel full of Canada geese over any watery world now, an osprey, jet blue burst or propel, colored name after some other lake you don't know, but with fish now think of those feathers wet and smooth as contrail. Third pickerel. Strange to think so much fish on the prairie subject of Pleistocene history and sedimentary scalar too, Kay said. Winnipeg was a dish, the city an old lake bed then, horizon seems more than flat, so ocular to look up out of this old water at sky and beach-line precision and quietness of the noonday pond, solitary vector of fish or insect, surface, actually, bubble tension, again, that learning to swim, horizontal ladder notion, not climbing to, but through the stars. Thank you.
Thanks, Roy. And I think I also have to say that we're very lucky to have Roy on our side, too. If you've seen any of those TV interviews of Roy during the redress movement, he was fearsome and fearless, totally incredible. As we were editing the book, too, I did have in mind the book that Roy put together of George Bowering's, the annotated bibliography of George Bowering called The Record of Writing. When I worked at Talonbooks, I was proofreading that, and just the process of the attention to details and a record of a life, the record of a writing life, was incredible that Roy did in that book. So I did have that come forward as a way of thinking through working with Fred on Scree. Next is Stan Persky, who's a founding force of the Vancouver Community Press, which published Fred's Tree in 1972. Of course, in New Star Books as well, an editor, a media commentator, cultural critic, a teacher, philosopher, and author of numerous books, and I think a force also in provincial and national politics within Canada. And his latest book is, of course, the Post-Communist Stories from Cormorant Books. Stan.
From Tree. Havoc Nation. How the earth dangles, eyeing over the geographical heap. Now the nation smothers, lays onto the private magic state its own fake imagination. Back off into my own feet and onto my own weight. Leap and into her hair love tangles, in her eyes havoc sleeps. Cry havoc and slip out the dogs of war. The first woman will always be the first woman, and that is a revelation. How do you tell someone else where you live? Can you reveal it as real a place as they sometimes think you are? In the mountains near here, there is a woman who is also Crow. She is overjoyed with tears when she meets another likewise Crow. Even if you knew this, could you look her up? I also know a man who is a tree, and he received a letter from a friend back east, which ends, "It must be a very real world where you are. Love, George." That man is me as well, a revelation. Well, dangle then, the revelation, revolution, nation, let slip the dogs of war out your back door. Trees and crows are the ones what knows this havoc, old havoc. Will stuff it in your cry. This magic leaping tree will never be the apple of anyone else's eye.
Thanks, Stan. Next is Carl Siegler. These are notes from Fred, too. So he has Carl Siegler, Mr. Talonbooks. So, of course, that is totally true way of thinking of what Carl's done, since 2000, up until 2011 working at Talon. But Carl has been a major advocate for Canadian publishing and actually for authors' rights within Canadian publishing, and a fierce critic of neoliberalization of publishing since the early 70s. He's been advocating. Besides publishing hundreds of books, many of them which have shaped Canadian literature for sure, he's been a teacher, an editor, and a translator of Rilke's Duino's Elegies, as I recall reading that from Talonbooks. And last year he was made a member of the Order of Canada for these contributions, these outstanding contributions to Canadian publishing. Carl.
Well, thank you, Jeff. And thank you, Kevin and everybody at Talonbooks for doing this book. And Les, fabulous design. Really nice job. I'm 68 years old now, and that's all. But the reason I mention that is I think it's a bit quaint that exactly half a lifetime ago, in 1981, when I was 34, I published a series of selected poems at Talonbooks, which included Phyllis Webb, it included Daphne Marlett, it included Fred Waugh, and a bunch of other people like George Bowering, Frank David, a lot of TISH poets. And it's a measure. I see that as a measure, kind of where I've been and where we've all come since then. And I have to tell you that I'm delighted that Talon has now done the collected Phyllis Webb and is doing the collected Fred Waugh and is going to do the collected Daphne Marlett. Right? I mean, what a great evolution of things that when I was younger I never thought possible and only aspired to. I was going to read from Tree because I just love that opening poem that Jeff read. And then I was going to counter it with something else towards the end of that. But everybody's reading from Tree. So what I'd like to do is I would like to read from something that became Owner's Manual. And when I first published this poem, as part of the Fred Waugh selected, Loki's Buried at Smoky Creek, this was an as yet unembedded poem. It was, floating. It hadn't been made part of a little book yet. It was like unpublished poems towards the end of the selected. It was a group of them. And I particularly love this poem because there's something about Fred's writing that's very sinister, actually, when you think about it. And I love, well, it's almost Halloween, right? Why not? Sinister. And what I love about this poem is, it's called How to Hunt. And what I love about it most of all is who or what is being hunted is the question. Color it brown. Think about it ahead of time. Think about it afterwards. Listen to you, how alone you are, sitting on a log in the forest. Look at it about to happen, completely in your mind. And the world, all the trees, even the sky, sighs, surrounds everything. Did you remember? Did you forget? Say it, She. How heavy the task. I've tracked myself to this log. Nothing else, nothing waits. Get up. Later, you'll get lost.
Thanks, Carl. I think at the halftime break, I'm going to have to ask Carl about a story that I heard about his MA defense at SFU, which involved a bottle of rye, I think. Bottle of scotch, sorry. Which I think is a model we'll have to try and aspire to. The last reader before we take a break is Rita Wong, whose most recent book of poetry is Undercurrent from Nightwood Editions. Rita's a dedicated cultural and environmental activist, a teacher, union leader, and poetic collaborator with Civil Unrest with Larissa Lai, and Just Out Perpetual with Cindy Machizuki. But I think also, from my perspective, Rita is like a true model of an engaged writer in every sense. A great model for us today. Rita.
Thank you, Jeff. And it's a bit nerve-wracking going at the end because you're listening to everybody and thinking, are they going to read the poem I want to read? I want to just say thank you to Fred and Pauline. I think I first met Fred the first year he started teaching at the University of Calgary. Between Larissa and I, we bookend the first year he started teaching there, and the last year I think he was finished working there. And it was an amazing class. It was like just astounding the number of people who continued to write after that class. Just off the top of my head, including Ashok Mathur and Sharon Poole Turner and Suzette Mayer and Wayman Chan, and just kind of amazing to have that group of people together with Fred. and Fred challenged me to, I don't know if Fred remembers this, but I was very shy and very quiet, and I didn't have much courage to speak up in class, and he kind of went out into the hallway and made me yell something out so that he could hear it out in the hall. And I was mortified. I thought I was going to die. But it made me angry enough that it broke some sort of internalized barrier, race kind of stuff I had in me that has been such a gift my whole life since. So I really want to thank you, Fred, for that. And I guess the other thing, outside of the institutions of learning that we've worked and operated in, I think the real gift has been his and Pauline's ability to cultivate the sense of community. So thanks to Fred, I ended up at this little conference called The Appropriate Voice, which then also led to Writing Through Race, and has led to a lot of really important work to address the effects of racism and colonization in Canada through writing and through speaking up and thinking through these challenging issues. So I have a lot to thank Fred for. And more recently, we're working on a project with some other folks around the Columbia River. So I'm going to read one poem that I think spans the work with water that I see running throughout so much of his oeuvre. Okay. Words fly from our mouths as leaves fall to the ground. from the trees in fall. We eat. Everything stares back at us. All this hunger is what we call the world. Wind and rain, no pain. Just a storm at the cave mouth howling, leaves rasping the pavement, and water. A river of it also falls to the mouth. The Yangtze, the Columbia, ocean, ocean, ocean. Lick the shore. The shore?
Thanks, Rita. So we'll take a short break. In some ways, I wish that we could just, everyone in the audience, select a poem and keep going, but we'd have to get the appropriate drugs for that. And apparently drugs are only available in the 60s. But let's take a short break, grab a drink, grab a book, and we'll be back with the screening of the 74 reading from Fred and Fred himself. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone. We're going to begin with this clip of Fred reading in 1974. Is that the case, Fred?
41 years ago.
41 years ago. Not 1941, but 41 years ago in 1974. Fred reading from Tree here at the Western Front.
Also, obviously, for the possibility of a language. I'd like to read a book, or it's not too long, it's not a large book, a book called Tree, published by New Store Books, then Vancouver Community Press, several years ago. This dedication reads, "Go to the forest, tree. Please wait for me there. Don't cut me down. I don't want any of this tree poetry shit from you. You don't know what a fucking tree is. If you think it's only in your head, you're full of shit. Trees is trees, and the only thing they're good for is lumber, so don't give me any crap about them being something else. For Christ's sake, you should the rest of us don't know sweet fuck all compared to you. Well, you don't know nothing until you go out there and bust your back on them. Setting chokers would break your ass so fast you wouldn't even want to look at a goddamn tree, let alone write about them. Then you'd know what a tree was instead of yapping about it. Tree of colored, textured brain, bathed in twisted neural headlights, twined trunk of cedar bark all shaggy, woman-man tree, under pits which root me to the image, like a root is, moving through the darkness of the soil, nerves and soul, like baling wire, a line of thought, taut shoots in screaming, hot blood leaps of pool, pool, pool of a tree, soft flow of dancer, slowing air. Oh, dream of tree, you dream of me. Oh, branch of itself, you are a synapse of that line, and think me, clear brain loops. The turning rings of yourself are of me, our tissues cross. I always hoped you'd give me heart rings in your dream. Dear birch, across from me we face the quiet pool of ourselves. Face each other, return, we look that way. I'm no tree except that part of me, as roots now and new spring up among the willows on the roadside shoots of alder, cherry, maple runners' buds grow at the sky from clay and gravel daily now. Each day a fraction of the snow melts up the bank. Those green plum eyes seep out. I imagine it a memory tree. Birds in my hair, snow on the ground. The history of trees are rocks of granite, spruce and birds. Up here, the wind. That's from John's poem. Shut up. No dogs. It wasn't apple, that was cherry, branches hanging in the window frame. Apple pasture, cherry chickens.
I have an incredible craving for a player's filter and a kokanee pilsner in a stubby. I don't. Is there a way that we can do this?
It was Rothman's, actually.
It was Rothman's. Oh, okay. There goes the myth. It was Rothman's. Ladies and gentlemen, Fred Waugh.
Well, thank you so much for being here tonight, and it's overwhelming. I'm overwhelmed with the book. I'm overwhelmed with the community that I have been blessed with, and it's a community that I've always felt was so much part of the work, so much part of, that is, the poetry is not separate from the people and the energy and so forth. I'd like particularly to thank Les Smith, the designer of this book. I think he's done a stunning job. And Jeff, Les, I'd like you to stand up, please. Yes. And Greg Gibson was the surprisingly to me, a real editor. In other words, he really nailed me. He said, what does this mean? Do you know how to spell this? I don't care about spelling. He does. Anyway, Greg was just so wonderful in guiding us through this, the text and that. And of course, Jeff, an old friend and colleague who's paid attention to the work closely. And I don't know if you were working at Talonbooks when they were doing Breathing My Name with a Sigh, but anyway, Jeff was a fantastic editor, and he managed to take this work that I had never really conceived of as being a work. I had just, like, you write a poem, you write a poem, you write a poem, you write you're in that kind of thing, and then all of a sudden there's this, and it's quite a surprise. And I'd like to thank Kevin Williams at Talonbooks for his vision of taking on this collected series after echoing Carl's wonderful move in around 1980, when he said, we've got to take on Canadian poetry. And he took on Canadian poetry with that series. And this is a reflection of that. And after a life of writing. I'm not finished yet. This is only the first half. I've got the. But I owe an awful lot to Talonbooks for being a mainstay for our poetry community, for my writing, and for the sense of this city and this country. I'm just going to read one piece, and it's the last poem in the book, and we'll end there. I was by the time I got to the 1991, I was really into this thing called a Udiniki, which is a poetic diary. And I got there through our friend B.P. Nicol, who had done U2 Nicky, as some of you might know. But it's a combination. Udiniki is a poetic diary. It's a very simple thing. We know it from Basho's Journey to the North Provinces. That's our common reference to it in the bookstores, anyway. But I've used this form for done a little bit of hiking in the mountains, and it's probably one of the most dear, most precious things to me is to be in the mountains and to be on these hiking trips. This is called Dead in My Tracks, Wildcat Creek, Udiniki, which I think Carl recognized at the time as a turn in the writing. Saturday, July 29th, 89. Oh, golden, golden morning. West of Golden, we leave the Trans-Canada and drive north about 60 kilometers up Blaeberry River past Dowd Hill. From the chopper site, we can see south to Howes Pass, a long sweep of valley brilliant in a pillowed midsummer heat haze, and hours spent wrapping the cars and trucks in chicken wire, old paranoid alpine parking lot visions of the imaginary porker chewing our tires and rat hoses. Camps just west, a 10-minute Bezier curve swirl and plop up Wildcat Creek on a west slope facing east to the Continental Divide, ridgeline of the BC-Alberta boundary. You have to remember this is 1989, and Tiananmen Square had been going on for a couple of months, and it was weighing. There was a weight. At least where I was, I felt a weight. Ringed by glaciers as usual. Aisha, Baker, Parapet. While we set up camp during the afternoon, I'm in a global mode. You know, the simultaneity of the world going on right now. Paris, Kyoto, Beijing. The pavement of Tiananmen Square. The hot lines sniffing out the dissidents. CBC bulletin, even email media drama. It's 1989, email. Of the last 2 months, still in the air, even up here, radioless, only antennaed in my bones. Our name is Bones, your name is my name. My borders are altitude and silent. A pause print cosine, climate from the lake to the tree line. All crumbly underfoot at the edges, cruddy summer snowmelt, soft wet twig and bow-sprung alpine fir, but more than this, height is my pepper. China, don't. Now, broken breaths contour intervals at the next 100 feet, and then the sky-remembered night on the plateau above the Saskatchewan Qu'Appelle. Oh, stars, what solitude, your blue line and flight, or weight. The inverse holds me shoulder to shoulder. My clouds as alpine meadows Newton would have cut, yet minds find bandwidth in this topos parabola chaos around the earth house. Little reflection. Here's this stone under heathered turf, back bent as I dig and ruffle, sacrum drawn to the music, a slow and daily pelvic tilt of elevation. Is this numbered boundary nowhere? I'm close to 7,000 here. Maybe I'll just do the horse, not to hold the world, just touch, complete the circuit. Borders, such thin thoughts, apples of our eyes. Salvage yesterday's Tiananmen, a power line buzz above. Along my spine, my legs go up and down. Heart all summer heavy with the people. Sunday, July 30th. We hike east across the valley toward Mistaya Mountain, as far as a scree slope on the south side of a granodiorite carbuncle, so massive we're left only to pick up the chip and below the heel of. Each rock vectors through the eyes to the height of the stomach and stops me, dazzles, dead in my tracks. Such singular surfaces are impossible to avoid. Eyes tumble, click, stop, and stare, stop, stare, at pink, molten, sunset rivers of limestone, sawtooth schist embedded. But at this rate, the hike's all history, Pleistocene. No animals, no print, no scat. Goat tracks? Too faint now, to be sure. No sky-mirrored glacial swimming holes today. No fresh water, heather very dry, the bees buzz, butterflies, doze in the sun at the bottom of a scree slope waiting for the others. Sugar of their struggled death in China's humid night so far away. Maybe that's the simplest equation for the headwaters, television's human river. And now the sun decreases the friction. The fingers of my right hand trace a band of quartz. My eyes sink under the brim, far away, but not so far away. Monday the 31st. Today we climbed the same side of the valley as yesterday, but now we've taken a keep more to the left route to a neck or col between Alberta and BC, under Mistaya, lunch beside a snow-patched lake. When deconstruing rock, hold back the crude and the harsh, or take reality for simple target, the sun. A nation as large as China is just another scheme for thirst and war, another centered project tunneling Earth. My father's fingers poked wet into the mud of a rice paddy. Rumors, the same large spun sky here, in the thin air and during the long winter, quartz grows with the sparkle of a bridge. Every stone on this mountain clicks. Same old biotic tumbler, locked, unlocked sadness. Not of the 100-blossomed mountain, not of the 9 millennia incense, but of the dragon-slit tongue silenced, youth before old age. After lunch, drowsiness sets in under the warmth of the sun. No birds sing. Not so far away, the glacier rivers roar in the July heat. Shale, shard, weep, shard, shale, weep, shale, weep, shard, shale, weep, shale, weep, shard, shard, weep, shale, shard, weep, shale, weep, weep, shh. Those rocks this morning on the way up appeared full of signs and messages. So I walked around in a meander and kind of grilled each striated spot for information, news of the conglomerate Earth. Or ant. The others' words around me buzz and fall like horseflies. Alberta looks busy from this side. Jasper, Banff, another of those new equations to satisfy war's glacial thirst. Ice blue skyline, jet-tracked, entrepreneur, prende. The wooden handle of an ice axe stuck in the snow. When making an axe handle, the pattern is occasionally too far off, somewhere else, out of sight, man, out of mind. Snow pond fed by two large drifts vectored off of moraine, no real fish. The Beijing hotline surfaces as jet track reminder through the high blue air, then sinks at news of the killings, deep like a floating thermostat, deep like a disappearing hook, baited. Tuesday, August 1st. I didn't sleep very well last night because I had to get up as breakfast helper this morning. Fretted about the alarm on my wristwatch being loud enough, and so now, mid-afternoon, sit on a slope above what we've come to call Crystal Gardens, on the cool, windy side of a grassy knoll, tired and lulled by the rush of waterfall across the valley, and above the alleyway that led us here, full of crystals dangled and hidden for years, we poke under little rock ledges. Quiet here. Light breeze to keep the horseflies down. I glass across a valley to a slope for yesterday's tracks, but they've melted out. Pan back to a blurry knoll of purple, yellow, red, pink, and white on green with songs, I don't want a sickle. I can't get out of my head. And there are the others, after lunch sprawl on the heather, Pauline reading in her flower book. Smoke in the wind, the forest below, porcupine under the wire quietly chewing our tires. Is that it? Smoke in the city? Slow sweep of a broom in the square? Small thunderstorm coming around Trapper Peak should force us down the hill. While on this bared over gopher-searching mountainside I linger stopped, can't keep my eyes off the rocks and surfaces, surging to not so much arrest myself in all this otherness, as greedily scour the dripping quartz for crystal jewels for my daughters. Something lucky, something old, something eight-spot, rooted in rock, fatherness, ancestral distance cut. Handheld Pleistocene. From above wildcat rockscape of old Renaissance bullet hole or navel with tracks going out the sides, a type of Malthusian linear function along the aisles of a Saturday afternoon matinee forever pocked with edge and gouged embedded pebble from distant beach, a cracked and weathered map of textured tilt propeller hummed out from a umphalic sedimentary lint, enough to tell stories history, warped high enough in the diurnal headlines from Beijing and Shanghai, so that a geologist imagining a fake fish in a fake lake scrapes around the edges for shrapnel. But me, I think in my own mittened photos of the life, look out of and far away from these threads through the hole to continue the prospect beyond impact of landing very hard and fast and past the anima button. New moon tonight, Wednesday. A wet day. Drizzle started last night after days of heat. The snow line is about 8,500 feet this morning. Very cool all day, off and on rain and sleet, some hail. And no respite tonight, so now I lie in our tent at 9 p.m., still light enough to write. I put on my toque and gloves. No thought, just body. A few of us walked up the valley on the other side of Wildcat Creek and crossed many feeder creeks and the Glacier River at the head of the valley. I had to take off my pants and boots once. The water came up to just above the knees. Remember that, Trude? Memoried on and off all day crossing Toby Moraine years ago with my brother and Loki, and how that crossing just below the crotch rejuvenated bruised ligaments. This time my feet remain ice all day. All these rocks, constant mirror and presence in my eyes, more rocks than grains of sand in the whole world, I bet someone. Intricate pattern, surface, keep stopping boot in pitch for eye to zoom. Sometimes I stop and try translating the imagogrammatic surfaces. What do I look for? This I-Chinging the earth for some other gate of heavenly peace? Monotone loudspeaker in the square signaling, go home and save your life. Old, embedded, said-again family bone names. Scale of shale, jamstone, lintel, henge. When the doors open, there's nothing to catch the eye. Except the sun, blink. Now this tent on the outside of a non-scaled phenomenon. We'll see, Fred says to himself, the tree, as much a cinnabar flag as the mountains folded and folded, with uncountable broken arms and legs floating. This sky of clouds, new grass melon, summer fields creased, by forcing them into the center of the square, the indelible occupies the heart until next time. These basins of attraction, these grains, these fractal additions, night swoops very low, just a reminder. Thursday, August 3rd, 89. This morning I sit in the tent writing and try to situate the play in this place. The world today feels all stage. Nothing moves. A set. There are the huge mist hackles clinging to the mountains, but no history. Far, far down the valley, a chainsaw whines. At night now, some of the creeks disappear. Winter. Friday, August 4th, 89. This last day, we hike up the col between Pato and Mestea, but get caught in a cold mist fog. Just behind the gauze, the oval of the sun teases. The cover didn't break, so we don't go any further than the snowfield. We spend the rest of the day circumnavigating the head of the valley and several glacial lips up and down and home, and that's 8.5 hours to a spaghetti dinner and the sky lifting to a blue evening. Now nearly 9 o'clock and the mosquitoes, after days of rain, are up for it. Out of the corner of my eye, more rocks. And out an ear, I hear a few birds sing their particular song, not solitary. The creeks rush and gurgle down to the valley below. In a corner of my mind is tomorrow's 2.5-hour hike out to the trailhead and then the long drive home. But nowhere else. Clear, stinging peaks, rock green moss, campion, all surface news, inked to the bloated stone heroes massed alongside Mao's mausoleum. Same shards here, within the square, a percolation network. 5 lines, 5 soldiers a line, Duende stone, Thanos stone. Thanks very much for coming tonight.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks to the readers. Of course, thanks, Fred, for the half-life, like nuclear half-life of writing. And thanks to everyone at Talon, past, present, and future. Thanks to the Western Front. And I guess there's still some more wine and some books to sell. We can hang out a little bit, I guess. Thanks, everyone.